Good morning, afternoon or evening everybody. Welcome back to part 6 of this scale model build series, Panther 44. Last time out we painted the majority of the fine details of the tank, added mud effects to the lower hull and finished off the wheels. You can rewind time and watch that using the link above. I know I promised last time that we would finally get the tank finished this week, but unfortunately that is not the case. This video will focus solely on the painting and weathering of the tracks. We will be laying down the base layer, adding rust effects, dirt effects, and graphite. So without further ado, let's get cracking. The tracks in question are a set of resin, workable links that I printed myself, the file I got from Cults 3D. I also printed off a spare wheel and some ammo boxes. Again, these files are from Cults. To make some of the smaller pieces easier to paint, I first super glue them to a cocktail stick, ensuring I'm gluing to a position that cannot be seen. Now it's time to lay down a layer of primer. Like before, I am using this one-shot black primer that can be sprayed straight from the bottle. I give the links a healthy coat on both sides of the tracks, trying my best to get in all the nooks and crannies. Once the main bulk of the priming is done, I start bending the tracks around my hand to paint the inside of the link. This is crucial to do either at this stage or the paint stage. Otherwise, we will be left with bare resin color showing when the tracks wrap themselves around the sprocket and guide wheel. Whilst I have the primer in the airbrush, I paint the ammo boxes, spare wheel and all the spare track links. Next, it's time to lay down the base layer. My go-to for this is XF63 German Grey, mixed 50-50 with acrylic thinner. I paint both surfaces of the tracks in this finish, again trying my best to get into all the little gaps and details. Because I put so much effort into fully priming the tracks, I'm not too fussed if I miss the odd spot here and there. This will just look like shadow once completed. Like I said though, it's important to get a good coat either of the primer or this grey layer so we don't have any light grey resin colour showing through in the gaps. I also paint the spare links and the ammo boxes in this base finish. Now it's time to add some variation to the metal. I mix up a German grey and white solution from Vallejo, mixed with a few drops of tap water. Then I use a similar technique I used when chipping, using a sponge on some tweezers to add light grey areas to the links. This will enhance the rust effects and give variation to the finish. Admittedly, I didn't use enough white in the grey, so it is not as clear as I would have hoped. The lighter the colour used over the top, the bigger the variation in rust tone will be. Next, it's time for some rust. I will be using this light and dark rust enamel wash by Mig Ammo. To dilute some areas, I use white spirit. I start with the dark rust, laying down a healthy coat pretty much all over the tracks. To help the spread of the wash, I dab white spirit in some areas. Depending on how rusty you want your tracks, it might take a few coats. I went for just the single coat this time, not going for the full-blown rusted out look. Once the dark rust has pretty much dried, I start adding the light rust tones. This time, I am being a lot more random with the application, aiming for gaps and surfaces that might hold water and show signs of surface rust. The underside I give more of a washed coat over the flat surface. With the rust effects done, I lock in the work so far with a light coat of varnish. As per, I am using this Satin varnish by VMS, my go-to for any clear coat work. Next, it's time for the fun stuff, adding the mud and dirt. I am using a combination of Mr. Weathering Paste, Dark Earth Pigment, and European Earth Pigment. I start by mixing up a sludge solution using the Mr. Weathering Paste and some white spirit. Once mixed, I start stippling the mud into the gaps in the tracks, again trying to be random with the application. Obviously, the more you add, the more muddy the tracks will look. To aid curing time, I use a hairdryer. If you try this technique, be careful applying too much heat to the resin tracks. They can warp if heated too much. Next, I add some more of the Mr. Weathering Paste, this time straight out of the jar, to create some thicker muddy areas. And again, I whip up the hairdryer to speed up the process. When I am happy with the amount of mud applied, I start with the pigments, starting with the dark earth. For this, I make a wash with white spirit. Then, as before, start adding randomly. The whole process is just about adding layers of different dirt, being random with the application, but trying not to cover too much of the previous layer, so we have some variation to the final finish. The process is then repeated with the final pigment, European Earth. This finish I also apply to the inside of the tracks to give them a dusty feel. The final stage to the tracks is adding graphite. This, in my opinion, is the easiest and most effective of all the techniques used so far. I simply rub the raised areas with a graphite stick. This gives all these surfaces a worn metal shine. On the inside face, I run the full length of the tracks with the graphite in the areas the road wheels will run. These areas would be constantly worn, so look permanently shiny. Finally, I blend with a cotton bud until I'm happy with the result. With both sets of tracks painted and weathered, the final thing to do is fit them to the tank. This is just a case of carefully pulling them around the drivetrain and putting in the final pin. I always leave the last pins loose, just in case I ever need to remove them. And that's it for this episode. If you have found it helpful or mildly entertaining, Please do hit those like and subscribe buttons and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Next time out, we actually will get this thing done, I promise. We will be looking at weathering with oil washes, adding the final touches and the final layer of dust and dirt. But for now, farewell and happy modeling, everybody.